Good morning and good afternoon. So I read this yesterday, but unfortunately I had my settings wrong and the video on demand didn't save. So I'm going to start rereading prologue and chapter for today, and then a chapter a day during the work week. That way I can archive these correctly and people can come back and listen if they want. So we're going to start off with the prologue here shortly. I need a better countdown timer. This one's too long. So I'm just going to switch to live and just going to go. All right, so the book is Dragonwing. It is the first book in the Deathgate cycle by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. It's one of my favorites growing up. I haven't read it in like a couple decades. And I don't read as much as I would like to, and I figured this is a good way to get into reading again and streaming, two things I want to do more of. So, prologue. Be at ease, Haplo. Come in and make yourself comfortable. Sit down. There are no formalities between us. Allow me to fill your glass. We drink what was once called the stirrup cup, a salute to your long journey. You like the port? Ha! My talents are many and manifold, as you know, but I begin to think that only time, not magic, can produce a truly fine port. At least that's what the old books teach. I've no doubt our ancestors were right about that, no matter how wrong they were in other things. There is something about the drink I miss, a warmth, a mellowness that comes with age. This port is too harsh, too aggressive. Fine qualities in men, Haplo, but not in wine. So, you are prepared for your journey. Is there any need or want I can satisfy? Say so, and it's yours. Nothing? Ah, I do envy you. My thoughts will be with you every moment, waking and sleeping. Another salute to you, Haplo, my emissary to an unsuspecting world. And they must not suspect. I know we've been over this before, but I want to stress this again. The danger is great. If our ancient enemy catches even the slightest hint that we've escaped their prison, they will move land, sea, sun, and sky, as they did once, to thwart us. Sniff them out, Haplo. Sniff them out as that dog of yours sniffs out a rat, but never let them catch a whiff of you. Let me refill your glass. Another salute. This one to the Sartan. You hesitate to drink. Come, I insist. Your rage is your strength. Use it. It will give you energy. Therefore, to the Sartan, they made us who we are. How old are you, Haplo? You have no idea? I know. Time has no meaning in the labyrinth. Let me think. When I first saw you, you looked to be just over 25 years. A long life for those of the labyrinth. A long life and one that had almost ended. How well I remember that time, 5 years ago. I was about to re-enter the labyrinth when you emerged. Bleeding, barely able to walk, dying. Yet you look up at me with an expression. I will never forget it. Triumph. You had escaped. You had beaten them. I saw that triumph in your eyes, in your exultant smile, and then you collapsed at my feet. It was the expression which drew me to you, dear boy. I felt the same when I escaped from that hell so long ago. I was the first one to make it through alive. Centuries ago, the Sartan thought to defeat our ambition by sundering the world that was ours by rights and throwing us into their prison. As you well know, the way out of the labyrinth is long and tortuous. It took centuries to solve the twisting puzzle of our land. The old books say the Sartan devised this punishment in hopes that our bounding ambition and our cruel and selfish natures would be softened by time and suffering. You must always remember their plan, Haplo. It will give you the strength you'll need to do what I ask of you. The Sartan had dared to assume that, when we emerged into this world, we would be fit to take our places in any of the 4 realms we chose to enter. Something went wrong. Perhaps you'll discover what it was when you enter Deathgate. It seems, from what I have been able to decipher in the old books, that the Sartan were to have monitored the labyrinth and kept its magic in check. But Either through malicious intent or for some other reason, they forsook their responsibility as caretakers of our prison. The prison gained a life of its own, a life that we knew only one thing: survival. And so, the labyrinth, our prison, came to see us, its prisoners, as a threat. After the Sartan abandoned us, the labyrinth, driven by its fear and hatred of us, turned deadly. When at last I found my way out, I discovered the Nexus, this beautiful land the Sartan had established for our occupation, and I came across the books. Unable to read them at first, I worked and taught myself, and soon learned their secrets. I read of the Sartan and their hopes for us, and I laughed aloud. The first and only time in my life I have ever laughed. You understand me, Haplo? There is no joy in the labyrinth. But I will laugh again when my plans are complete, when the 4 separate worlds, fire, water, stone, and sky, are again one. Then I will laugh long and loudly. Yes, it is time for you to leave. You've been patient with the ramblings of your lord. Another salute to you, Haplo. As I was the first to leave the labyrinth and enter the Nexus, so you shall be the first to enter Deathgate and walk the worlds beyond. The realm of the sky. Study it well, Haplo. Come to know the people. Search out their strengths and their weaknesses. Do what you can to cause chaos in the realm, but always be discreet. Keep your powers hidden. Above all, take no action that will draw the attention of the Sartan, for if they discover us before I am ready, we are lost. Death first before you betray us. I know you have the discipline and the courage to make that choice, but more important, Haplo, you have the skill and the wits to make such a choice unnecessary. This is why I've chosen you for this mission. You have one other task. Bring me someone from this realm who will serve as my disciple, someone who will return to preach the word, my word, to the people. It can be someone of any race, elven, human, dwarven. Make certain that he or she is intelligent, ambitious, and pliable. In an ancient text, I came across a fitting analogy. You, Haplo, shall be the voice of one crying in the wilderness. And now, a final salute. We will stand for this one. To Deathgate, prepare ye the way. Chapter 1. Ireni Prison, Dandric, Midrealm. The crudely built cart lurched and bounced over the rough coralite terrain, its iron wheels hitting every bump and pit in what passed for a road. The cart was being pulled by a tear, its breath snorting puffs in the chill air. It took one man to lead the stubborn and unpredictable bird, while 4 more stationed on either side of the vehicle pushed and shoved the cart along. Just one sec. Making sure I have the right mic. Okay, I forgot to check that pre-stream. A small crowd garnered from the outlying farms had gathered in front of Ireni Prison, planning to escort the cart and its shameful burden to the city walls of Keyleth. There, a much larger crowd awaited the cart's arrival. Dayside was ending. The glitter of the firmament began to fade as the Lords of Night slowly drew the shadow of their cloaks over the afternoon stars. Night's gloom was fitting for this procession. The country folk, for the most part, kept their distance from the cart. They did this not out of fear of the tear, although those huge birds had been known to suddenly turn and take a vicious snap at anyone approaching them from their blind side, but out of fear of the cart's occupant. The prisoner was bound around the wrists by taut leather thongs attached to the sides of the cart, and his feet were manacled with heavy chains. Several sharp-eyed bowmen marched beside the cart, their feathered shafts nocked and ready to be let loose straight at the felon's heart if he so much as twitched the wrong way. But such precautions did not appear to offer the cart's followers much comfort. They kept their gaze, dark and watchful, fixed on the man inside as they trudged along behind at a respectful distance that marked increased when the man turned his head. If they'd had a demon from Herica chained up in that cart, the local farmers could not have gazed on it with any greater fear or awe. The man's appearance alone was striking enough to arrest the eye and send a shiver over the skin. His age was indeterminate, for he was one of those men whom life has aged beyond cycles. His hair was black without a touch of gray. Sleeked back from a high sloping forehead, it was worn braided at the nape of his neck. A jutting nose like the beak of a hawk, thrust forward from between dark and overhanging brows. His beard was black and worn in two thin short braids twisted beneath a strong chin. His black eyes, sunken into high cheekbones, almost disappeared in the shadows of the overhanging brows. Almost, but not quite, for no darkness in this world, it seemed, could quench the flame that smoldered in those depths. The prisoner was of medium height, his body bare to the waist and marked all over with gashes and bruises, for he had fought like a devil to avoid his capture. 3 of the sheriff's boldest men lay in their beds this day and would probably lie there for a week recovering. The man was lean and sinewy, his movements graceful and silent and swift. One might say, from looking at him, that here was a man born and bred to walk in the company of night. It amused the prisoner to see the peasants fall back when he glanced around them. He took to looking behind him often, much to the discomfiture of the bowmen, who were constantly lifting their shafts, their fingers twitching nervously, their gazes darting for instructions at their leader, a solemn-faced young sheriff. Despite the chill of the fall evening, the sheriff was sweating profusely, and his face brightened visibly when the coralite walls of Keyleth came in sight. Keyleth was small in comparison with the other 2 cities of Dandrick Isle. Its ill-kept houses and shops barely covered a square menka. In the very center stood an ancient fortress whose tall towers were catching the last light of the sun. The keep was constructed of rare and precious blocks of granite. In this day, no one remembered how it was built or who had built it. Its past history had been obscured by the present, by the wars that had been fought for its possession. Guards pushed open the city gates and motioned the cart forward. Unfortunately, the tier took exception to a ragged cheer that greeted the cart's arrival in Keyleth and came to a dead stop. The recalcitrant bird was alternately threatened and coaxed by its handler until it began moving again, and the cart trundled through the opening in the wall onto a smooth coralite street known grandiosely as King's Highway. No king in anyone's memory had ever set foot at the place. A large crowd was on hand to view the prisoner. The sheriff barked out an order in a cracked voice, and the bowmen closed ranks, pressing close around the cart, the front men in dire peril of being bitten by the nervous tier. Emboldened by their numbers, the people began to shout curses and raise their fists. The prisoner grinned boldly at them, seeming to consider them more amusing than threatening, until a jagged-edged rock sailed over the cart's sides and struck him in the forehead. The mocking smile vanished. Anger contorted the blood-streaked face. His fists clenched. The man made a convulsive leap at a group of ruffians who had discovered courage at the bottom of a wine jug. The leather thongs that held the man fastened to the cart stretched taut. The sides of the vehicle quivered and trembled. The chains on his feet jangled discordantly. The sheriff screeched, the young man's voice rising an octave in his fear, and the bowmen swiftly lifted their weapons, although there was some confusion over their target, the felon or those who had attacked him. The crudely made cart was strong, and the man inside, though he exerted all his energy, could neither break his bonds nor the wood that held them. His struggles ceased, and he stared through a mask of blood at the swaggering ruffian. "You wouldn't dare do that if I were free." "Oh, I wouldn't?" the youth jeered, his cheeks flushed with drink. "No, you wouldn't," replied the man coolly. His black eyes fixed themselves upon the youth, and such was the enmity and dire threat in their coal-fire stare that the young man blenched and gulped. His friends, who were urging him on, though they themselves stayed well behind him, took offense at the felon's remarks and became more threatening. The prisoner turned, glaring at one side of the street, then the other. Another rock struck him in the arm, followed by rotting tomatoes and a stinking egg that missed the felon but caught the sheriff squarely in the face. Having been prepared to kill the prisoner at the first opportunity, the bowmen now became his protectors, turning their arrows toward the crowd. But there were only 6 bowmen and about 100 in the mob, and things appeared likely to go ill for both prisoner and guards, when a beating of wings and high-pitched screams from overhead caused most of those in the crowd to take to their heels. 2 dragons, guided by helmed and armored riders, swooped in low over the heads of the mob. "Awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate it." Sending them ducking into doorways and dashing down alleys. A call from their leaders, still wheeling high overhead, brought the Dragon Knights back into formation. He descended, and his knights followed him, the dragon's wingtips clearing the buildings on either side of the street by barely a hand's breadth. Wings tucked neatly at their flanks, their long tails lashing wickedly behind, the dragons alighted near the cart. The knight's captain, a paunchy middle-aged man with a fiery red beard, urged his dragon closer. The Tyr, terrified at the sight and smell of the dragons, was heaving and howling and going through all kinds of gyrations, causing its handler no end of grief. "Keep that damn thing quiet," snarled the captain. The Tyr master managed to catch hold of the head and fixed his beast with an unblinking stare. As long as he could maintain the steady gaze, the stupid Tyr, for whom out of sight was out of mind, would forget the presence of the dragons and calm down. Ignoring the stammering, babbling sheriff who was hanging on to the captain's saddle harness as a lost child hangs on to its newly found mother, the captain gazed sternly at the bloody, vegetable-stained prisoner. "It seems I've arisen in time to save your miserable life, Hugh the Hand." "You did me no favor, Gareth," said the man grimly. He raised his shackled hands. "Free me. I'll fight all of you, and them too." He flicked his head at the remnants of the mob peeking out of the shadows. The captain of the knights grunted. "I'll bet you would. That death's a damn sight better than the one you're facing now, kissing the block. A damn sight better, and a damn sight too good for you, Hugh the Hand. A knife in the back, in the dark, that's what I'd give you, assassin scum." The curl of the hand's upper lip was emphasized by a feathery black mustache and was clearly visible, even in the failing light. "You know the manner of my business, Gareth." "I know only that you are a killer for hire, and that my liege lord met his end by your hand," retorted the knight gruffly, "and I've saved your head merely to have the satisfaction of placing it with my own hands at the foot of my lord's bier. By the way, they call the executioner Three-Chop Nick. He's never yet managed to sever a head from a neck at the first blow." Hugh gazed at the captain and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I didn't kill your lord." "Bah! The best master I've served murdered for a few barrels. How much did the elf pay you, Hugh? How many barrels will you take now to restore my lord's life to me?" Yanking on the reins, the captain, his eyes blinking back tears, turned the head of his dragon. He kicked the creature in the flanks just behind the wings and caused it to rise into the air, where it remained hovering over the cart, its snake-like eyes daring any of those lurking in the shadows to cross its path. The dragon knights riding behind likewise took to the air. The Tyr master, his own eyes watering, blinked. The Tyr once more trod sullenly forward, and the cart clattered over the road. It was night when the cart and its dragon escort reached the fortress keep and dwelling place of the Lord of Keyleth. The Lord himself lay in state in the center of the courtyard. Bundles of char crystal, like charcoal, but crystal. Bundles of char crystal soaked in perfumed oil surrounded his body. His shield lay across his chest. One cold, stiff hand was clasped around his sword hilt. The other hand held a rose placed there by his weeping lady wife. She was not among those gathered around the body, but was within the keep, heavily sedated with poppy syrup. It was feared that she might hurl herself upon the flaming bier, and while such sacrificial immolation was customary on the Isle of Dandrick, in this case it could not be allowed, Lord Roger's wife having just recently given birth to his only child and heir. The Lord's favorite dragon stood nearby, proudly tossing its spiky mane. Standing beside it, tears rolling down his face, was the head stablemaster, a huge butcher's blade in his hand. It wasn't for the Lord he wept. As the flames consumed its master's body, the dragon, which the stablemaster had raised from an egg, would be slaughtered, its spirit sent to serve its lord after death. All was prepared. Every hand had held a flaming torch. Those milling about the courtyard awaited only one thing before they set fire to the bier: the head of the Lord's murderer to be placed at his feet. Although the keep's defenses had not been activated, a cordon of knights had been drawn up to keep the curious out of the castle. The knights drew aside to allow the cart entry, then closed ranks as it trundled past. A cheer went up from those standing in the courtyards when the cart was sighted, rumbling beneath the arched gateway. The knights escorting it dismounted, and their squires ran forward to lead the dragons to the stables. The Lord's dragon shrieked a welcome, or perhaps a farewell, to its fellows. The Tyr was detached and led away. The Tyr master and the 4 men who had pushed the vehicle were taken to the kitchen, there to be fed and given a share of the Lord's best brown ale. Sir Gareth, his sword loosened in its scabbard, his eyes noting every move the prisoner made, climbed into the cart. Drawing his side knife, he cut the leather thongs attached to the wooden slats. "We caught the elf lord, Hugh," Gareth said in an undertone as he worked. "Caught him alive. He was on his dragon ship sailing back to Tribus when our dragons overtook him. We questioned him, and he confessed giving you the money before he died." "I've seen how you question people," said Hugh, one hand free. He flexed his arm to ease the stiffness. Gareth, loosing the other one, eyed him warily. "The bastard would have confessed to being human if you'd asked him." "It was your cursed dagger we took from my lord's back, the one with the bone handle with those strange markings. I recognized it." "Damn right you did." Both hands were free. Moving swiftly, suddenly, Hugh's strong hands closed over the chainmail armor that covered the knight's upper arms. The assassin's fingers bit deep, driving the rings of the chainmail painfully into the man's flesh. And you know both how and why you saw it. Gareth sucked in his breath. His side knife jerked forward. The blade was 3/4 the way to Hugh's ribcage when, with an effort of will, the knight halted his reflexive lunge. "Get back!" he snarled at several of his fellows, who, seeing their captain accosted, had drawn their swords and were preparing to come to his assistance. "Let go of me, Hugh," Gareth spoke through gritted teeth. His skin was a ghastly leaden hue. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. "Your trick didn't work. You won't meet an easy death at my hand." Hugh, with a shrug and a slight sardonic smile, released his grip on the knight's arms. Gareth caught hold of the assassin's right hand, jerked it roughly behind his back, and grabbing his left, bound the two together tightly with the remnants of the leather thongs. "I paid you well," the knight muttered. "I owe you nothing." "And what about her, your daughter, whose death I avenged?" Spinning Hugh around by the shoulder, Gareth swung his mailed fist. The blow caught the assassin on the jaw and sent him crashing through the wooden slats of the cart. Sprawled on his back on the ground, the hand lay in the muck of the courtyard. Gareth jumped down from the cart, straddling the prisoner. The knight stared down at him coldly. "You'll die with your head on the block, you murdering bastard." "Bring him!" He ordered two of his men and kicked Hugh in the kidney with the toe of his boot. Gareth watched with satisfaction as the man writhed in pain. The knight added grimly, "And gag his mouth." Let's see, do I keep going? Yeah, it's only been 23 minutes. Apparently I'm doing 2 chapters, not just 1. Hope you don't mind. Chapter 2. Calith Keep, Dandrick, Mid-Realm. "Here's the assassin, Magica," said Gareth, gesturing to the bound and gagged prisoner. "Did he give you any trouble?" asked a well-formed man of perhaps 40 cycles, who gazed at Hugh with a sorrowful air, as though he found it impossible to believe that so much evil could reside in one human being. "None that I couldn't handle, Magica." "Well, that's not a good name, Magica," said Gareth. Or is that a title? Might be his title. "None that I couldn't handle, Magica," said Gareth, subdued in the presence of the House Magus. The wizard nodded and, conscious of a vast audience, straightened to his full height and folded his hands ceremoniously over his brown velvet cassock. He was a land magus and so wore the colors of the magic he favored. He did not, however, wear in addition the mantle of royal magus, a title he had, according to rumor, long coveted, but one which Lord Roger, for reasons of his own, refused to grant. Those standing in the muddy courtyard saw the prisoner being led before the person who was now, by default, the highest voice of authority in the fiefdom, and crowded around to hear. The light of their torches flared and danced in the cold evening breeze. The Lord's dragon, mistaking the tenseness and confusion for battle, trumpeted loudly, demanding to be unleashed upon the enemy. The stablemaster patted it soothingly. Soon it would be sent to fight an enemy that neither man nor even the long-lived dragon can finally avoid. "Remove the gag from his mouth," ordered the wizard. Gareth coughed, cleared his throat, and cast the hand a sidelong glance. Leaning near the wizard, the knight spoke in low tones. "You'll hear nothing but a string of lies. He'll say anything." "I said remove it," remonstrated Magica in a commanding tone that left no doubt in the minds of anyone standing in the courtyard who was now the master of Calith Keep. Gareth sullenly did as he was told. yanking the gag from Hugh's mouth with such force that he wrenched the man's head sideways and left an ugly welt on the side of his face. Every man, no matter how heinous his crime, has the right to confess his guilt and cleanse his soul. What is your name? Questioned the wizard crisply. The assassin, gazing over the wizard's head, did not answer. Gareth smote Hugh rebukingly. He is known as Hugh the Hand, Magica. Surname? Hugh spit blood. The wizard frowned. Come, Hugh the Hand, can't be your real name. Your voice, your manners, surely you are a nobleman. The Baton Sinister, no doubt. Yet, we must know the names of your ancestors in order to commend to them your unworthy spirit. You will not speak? Reaching out a hand, the wizard caught hold of Hugh's chin and jerked the man's face to the torchlight. The bone structure is strong, the nose aristocratic, the eyes exceedingly fine, although I seem to see something of the peasant in the deep lines in the face and the sensuality of the lips. But there is undoubtedly noble blood in your veins. I pity it runs black. Come, sir, reveal your true identity and confess to the murder of Lord Roger. Such confession will cleanse your soul. The prisoner's mouth widened in a grin. There was a flicker of flame deep in the sunken black eyes. Where my father is, his son will shortly follow, he replied. And you know better than any here that I did not murder your lord. Gareth raised his fist, intending to punish the hand for his speech. A glimpse of the wizard's face caused him to hesitate. Magica's brow cleared in an instant, his face smooth as a pail of fresh cream. The sharp eyes of the captain, however, had noted the ripple that passed across its surface at Hugh's accusation. Insolence, the wizard said coldly. You are bold for a man facing a terrible death, but we will hear you cry out for mercy before long. You better silence me, and silence me quick, said Hugh, his tongue running across the cracked and bleeding lips. Otherwise, people might remember that you are now guardian of the new little lord, aren't you, Magica? Which means you can run things around here until the kid's, 18? Or maybe longer than that if you can keep your web wound tight around him. And I've no doubt you'll be a great comfort to the grieving widow. What mantle will you wear tonight? The purple of Royal Magus? And wasn't it strange, my dagger disappearing like that, as if by magic? The wizard lifted his hands. The ground quakes in fury of this man's blasphemy, he shouted. The courtyard began to shake and tremble. Granite towers swayed. People cried out in panic, huddling close together. Some fell to their knees, wailing and pressing their hands in the muck and mud, shouting in supplication to the magus to ease his anger. Magica glared down his long nose at the captain of the knights. A punch from Gareth, given somewhat reluctantly, it seemed, in the small of Hugh's back, caused the assassin to gasp and draw a painful breath. The hand's gaze, however, never wavered or faltered, but remained fixed on the wizard, who was pale with fury. I have been patient, said Magica, breathing heavily, but I will not be subjected to such filth. I apologize to you, Captain. The wizard continued shouting to be heard above the rumbling of the ground and the cries of the people. You were right. He will say anything to save his miserable life. Gareth grunted, but did not reply. Magica raised his hands placatingly, and, gradually, the ground ceased to shake. People drew deep breaths of relief and rose to their feet again. The knight's gaze flicked aside at Hugh, met the hand's own intense penetrating stare. Gareth frowned. His eyes went from the assassin to the wizard, and they were dark and thoughtful. Magica, speaking to the crowd, did not notice. I am sorry, truly sorry, that this man must leave this life with such black spots upon his soul, said the wizard in grieved and pious tones. Yet so he chooses, and here are witness that I have given him ample opportunity to confess. There were sympathetic, respectful murmurs. Bring forth the block! The murmurs changed in aspect, becoming loud and anticipatory. People shifted around to get a good view. Two burly warders, the strongest that could be found, emerged from a small doorway leading to the dungeon of the keep. Between them they carried a huge stone, not the lacy and delicate coralite of which almost everything in the city except the keep itself was constructed. Magica, whose business it was to know the types of natures and powers of all rocks, recognized the stone as marble. It did not come from this island or from the larger neighboring continent of Eulandia, for no such rock existed there. The marble, therefore, came from the larger neighboring continent of Aristogon, which meant that this block had been dug out of the land of the enemy. Either it was a very old piece of marble and had been brought over legitimately during one of the few periods of peace between the humans and the elves of the Tribus Empire, a theory the wizard discounted, or Three Chop Nick, as he was known, had smuggled it over, which Magica thought probable. Not that it mattered. There were numerous die-hard nationalists among the Lord's friends, family, and followers, but the wizard doubted if there were any who would object to a piece of dung such as Hugh the Hand losing his head on an enemy rock. Pardon me. Let's see. Still, they were a hot-headed clan, and the wizard was thankful that the marble was so covered with dried blood that few of Roger's kin would recognize the stone. None would think to question its origin. The marble block was about 4 feet by 4 feet and had a groove cut out of one side that was almost exactly the size of the average human neck. The warders, staggering under the weight, hauled the block out into the courtyard and placed it in front of Magica. The executioner, Three Chop Nick, ducked out from beneath the doorway, and a tremor of excitement rippled through the crowd. Nick was a giant of a man, and not one soul on Dandrick knew who he really was or what he looked like. Whenever he performed... I'm gonna have to just get a bunch of crab emotes and scenes and just kind of make that my thing. Whenever he performed an execution, he wore black robes and a black hood over his head so that, when passing among the populace on a daily basis, he would not be recognized and shunned. Unfortunately, the result of his clever disguise was that people began to suspect every man over 7 footspans in height of being an executioner and tended to avoid them all indiscriminately. Crab, crab, crab. When it came time to deal out justice, however, Nick was the most popular and sought-after executioner on Dandrick. Whether an incredible bungler or the most talented showman of his time, Three Chop certainly knew how to entertain an audience. No victim ever died swiftly, but lingered on in screaming agony as Nick hacked and chopped away with a sword that was as dull as his wits. Why do you hate crabs? What'd they ever do to you? I need to know. What? Do you not eat them, or do you just fear them? A crabinophobia. All eyes went from the hooded Nick to the black-haired prisoner, who, it must be admitted, had impressed most of those present. That's a shitty origin story. And I hope that's not true. Who, it must be admitted, had impressed more of those present with his coolness. But all those in the courtyard that night had either admired or actually been fond of their murdered liege lord, and it was going to be a distinct pleasure for them to see his killer die horribly. The people noted with satisfaction, therefore, that at the sight of the executioner and the blood-stained weapon in his hand, Hugh's face set in mask-like calm. And though he carried himself well and forbore to tremble, they could see his breath come quick and hard. Gareth grabbed the hand by the arms and, dragging him out of the wizard's presence, led the prisoner the few steps to the block. "What you said about Magica," Gareth hissed the words in a low undertone, and perhaps feeling the wizard's eyes bore into his back, let the sentence stand unfinished, contenting himself with interrogating the assassin with a glance. Hugh returned his gaze, his eyes black hollows in the flickering torchlit night. "Watch him," he said. Gareth nodded. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, his face unshaven. What are coconut crabs? And how was Guam? I've heard great things. I worked with some guys from Guam in my early military days. He had not slept since the death of his lord 2 nights previous. He wiped his hand across his sweat-rimed mouth. Then the hand went to his belt. Hugh caught a flash of fire reflecting off a sharp-edged blade. "I can't save you, Hugh. Gareth mumbled. They'd cut us both to ribbons, but I can end it for you quick. It'll likely cost me my captaincy. The knight glanced back darkly at the wizard. But then, after what I've heard, it's likely I've lost that anyhow. You're right. I owe that much to her. He shoved the hand around to stand in front of the block. The executioner solemnly removed his black robes. He disliked having them fouled with blood, and handed them to a young boy standing nearby. Highly elated, the child stuck out his tongue at an unfortunate friend who had been hovering near, hoping for the same honor. Man, lucky. Although I did enjoy South Korea for a year, so I guess I'm lucky too. Grasping the sword, Nick took 2 or 3 practice swings to limber up his arms, and then indicated, with a nod of his head, that he was ready. Gareth forced Hugh to his knees before the block. The knight stepped back, but not far, only 2 or 3 paces. His fingers flexed nervously around the knife concealed in the folds of his cape. His excuse was framing itself in his mind. When the blade sank into his neck, Hugh screamed out that it was you, Magica, who killed my lord. I heard it clearly. The words of a dying man are, they say, always true. Of course, I know that he lied, but I feared the peasants. Being a superstitious lot would take it ill. I thought it best to cut his miserable life short. Magica wouldn't believe it. He'd know the truth. Well, Gareth didn't have that much left to live for anyway. The executioner grabbed hold of Hugh's hair, intending to position the prisoner's head on the block, but Magica, perhaps sensing an uneasiness in the crowd that not even the excitement of a forthcoming execution could quite banish, raised a restraining hand. "Halt!" he cried, his robes swirling around him in the chill wind that sprung up. The wizard walked toward the block. "Hugh the Hand," said Magica in a loud, stern voice, "I give you one more chance. Tell us, now that you are near the realm of death, have you anything to confess?" Hugh raised his head. Perhaps the fear of approaching oblivion had finally struck him. "Yes, I have something to confess. I'm glad we understand each other," said Magica gently. The smile of triumph on the thin, aesthetic face was not lost on the watchful Gareth. "What is it you have to regret in leaving this life, my son?" The hand's swollen mouth twisted. Straightening his shoulders, he looked at Magica and said coolly, "That I never killed one of your kind, wizard." The crowd gasped in pleasurable horror. Three-Chop Nick chuckled beneath his hood. The longer this death dragged out, the better the wizard would reward it. Magica smiled with cool pity. "May your soul rot like your body," he said, casting Nick a look that plainly invited the executioner to have a good time. The wizard stepped back well out of the way and kept the blood from spattering on his robes. The executioner drew forth a black handkerchief and started to bind it around Hugh's eyes. "No," the assassin shouted harshly. "I want to carry that face with me." "Get on with it!" Foam flecked the wizard's lips. Nick grabbed his hair, but Hugh shook the hand free. Voluntarily, the prisoner laid his head down upon the blood-stained marble. His eyes were wide open, staring unblinkingly, accusingly at Magica. The executioner reached down, took hold of the man's short braid, and yanked it over to one side. Three-Chop liked a clear expanse of the neck with which to work. Nick raised his blade. Hugh drew a breath, gritted his teeth, and kept his eyes focused on the wizard. Gareth, watching, saw Magica blench, swallow, and dart hasty glances here and there as though seeking escape. "The horror of this man's evil is too much," the wizard cried. "Be swift! I cannot bear it!" Gareth gripped his knife. Nick's arm muscles bulged, preparing for the downward stroke. Women covered their eyes and peeped out between their fingers. Men craned to see over each other's heads. Children were hastily lifted up to get a better view. And then there came, from the gates, the clash of arms. And that's my lunch break. So I'm gonna end here, the end of chapter 2. I don't know if I can edit the video title so I can show that it's also chapter 2, not just chapter 1. Thanks for showing up again, Napalm, and listening to the same chapter again and bringing the crabs. God bless crabs. But first, I'm gonna Google coconut crabs because I'm curious. Coconut crabs. What's wrong with coconut crabs? They're adorable. Did they attack you? Yeah, I'm looking. They're pretty freaking cool. But I like crabs. Would you send me a pic? I don't see anything. You're not messaging my old account, are you? I have an old account. Oh, comment. Oh, got it. Let's see. Oh, there you are. Oh God. Okay. They're huge. I didn't realize how big they are. Okay. I can see your fear now. What the hell? That is scary. That's true. I didn't realize the mass of the crustacean. All right, but I got to get back to work. Thanks for showing up. And thanks to Cash for lurking and helping my numbers. I'm like this close. I got everything but the hour, not hours. The days. I need more days. Oh yeah, raid. Let's see. That is over here somewhere. Do manage stream. Still learning. Raid channel. Let's see. Hmm. Aw, that's too bad. I could raid Giant Bomb. Let's raid Giant Bomb. Fuck it. Yesterday I raided 8-Bit Drummer because I love that dude. He's rad. Giant Bomb. Start raid. I plan on going to their stream anyway, so that works for me. All right. Thanks for showing up. I'm going to try to do this every work week. Hopefully more people show up. We'll see. We'll see if this takes off. All right. Thanks, man. Love you. Bye.